On a cold and wet night in the forests of Oregon, rain fell hard and steady. Thunder rolled through the sky like distant drums. Lightning flashed, lighting up the trees for just a second before everything went dark again. The wind howled through the pines, shaking branches and sending leaves flying. Most people stayed inside, safe and dry, but not Lila Dawson. Lila was 16, small for her age, with messy brown hair and eyes that always seemed to be looking for something more. She lived alone in a little house at the edge of the woods. Her parents were gone, lost in a car crash years ago, and her grandfather had passed just a few months back. Now it was just her dog Rusty, and the old observatory he had built on the hill behind the house. She liked the quiet. She liked the stars. And tonight she liked the storm. She had been reading in her room when Rusty started barking like crazy. Not his usual bark, this was sharp, scared, almost angry. She put down her book, grabbed her raincoat, and stepped outside. The dog ran ahead, tail stiff, ears up. She followed, flashlight in hand, boots sinking into the mud. The woods were thick and dark. Rain soaked through her coat in minutes. Rusty led her deeper, past the creek, past the old oak with the lightning scar, all the way to the far edge of the property where the trees grew tall and close together. That was when she saw it. At first she thought it was a deer, something hurt lying on the ground. But as she got closer, she saw it wasn't an animal at all. It was a girl. She was pale, almost glowing in the dark, with long silver hair stuck to her face by the rain. Her ears were pointed, sharp like the illustrations in Lila's fantasy books. She wore strange clothes, smooth, dark fabric that shimmered like oil on water. A thin line of blue light ran down her arm, pulsing faintly. Beside her lay a creature Lila couldn't name. It was about the size of a large dog, covered in silver scales that caught the lightning flashes. Its wings were folded tight against its body, wet and torn. Its eyes were closed, but Lila could see the rise and fall of its chest. It had claws like knives and a long, whip-thin tail. It looked like a dragon, but not the kind from storybooks. This one felt real, dangerous, and hurt. Lila's heart pounded. She should have run, called the police, done anything but stand there. But something in the girl's face stopped her. She looked young, scared, alone, just like Lila. She knelt in the mud, ignoring the cold water soaking her jeans. She touched the girl's neck, cold skin but a pulse, weak but there. The girl's eyes fluttered open. They were green, deep, bright green like forest moss after rain. They locked onto Lila's, wide with fear and pain. "Don't be scared," Lila said softly. "I won't hurt you." The girl tried to speak, but only a whisper came out. It sounded like music, but broken. Not English. Not any language Lila knew. Then the girl's hand moved, trembling, and pressed against Lila's wrist. A jolt ran through Lila, not pain but warmth, like sunlight after a long winter. Images flashed in her mind, stars. A great ship falling from the sky, fire in the clouds. A man with eyes like ice shouting words she couldn't understand. She pulled back, gasping. The girl's eyes filled with tears. "Help," she whispered, this time in rough, accented English. "Please," Lila didn't ask questions. She didn't think. She just acted. She wrapped her coat around the girl, then turned to the creature. It stirred as she touched its side, letting out a low rumbling sound, half growl, half whimper. But it didn't attack. It watched her with golden eyes, intelligent and tired. "Okay," Lila said, more to herself than to them. "Okay, we're going to my house. Getting them back was hard." The girl could barely walk, leaning heavily on Lila. The creature, Lila decided to call it a dragon for now, dragged itself along, wings scraping the ground. Rusty stayed close, growling softly but not barking. He seemed to understand this was serious. By the time they reached the house, Lila was soaked and shaking. She helped the girl onto the couch, then wrapped her in every blanket she could find. The dragon curled up on the rug by the fireplace, breathing slow and deep. Lila lit a fire, not for warmth, she had heat, but because the flickering light felt safer somehow. She boiled water, found some old first aid supplies, and gently cleaned the cut on the girl's arm. It wasn't bleeding much, but it glowed faintly, like a bruise made of light. The girl winced but didn't pull away. "My name is Lila," she said. The girl looked at her for a long moment. "Elira," she said finally. "Elira," Lila repeated. It sounded right, like wind through tall grass, and this, she nodded at the dragon. Kalen, Illyra whispered. My bond brother. Lila didn't understand what that meant, but she didn't push. She brought soup, canned but hot, and watched as Illyra ate slowly, her hands still shaking. Kalen lifted his head once, sniffed the air, then went back to sleep. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside it felt quiet, calm. Hours passed. The fire burned low. Lila sat in the armchair watching them. She should have been terrified. Aliens, because that's what they had to be on her couch. But she wasn't scared. She felt useful. Needed. For the first time in months, she didn't feel alone. Then the lights flickered. Not the house lights. The sky. Lila went to the window. Through the rain, she saw something in the clouds. Not lightning. Too steady. Too bright. 3 red dots moving in perfect silence, circling low over the ridge. Her stomach dropped. They're here, Illyra said from the couch. Her voice was tight with fear. Who? Lila asked, though she already knew. My father's hunters, Illyra said. They followed me. Lila's mind raced. Police wouldn't help. No one would believe her. And if those things in the sky were what she thought they were, calling anyone might get them all killed. She turned back to Illyra. We have to hide. Illyra nodded weakly. The observatory, she said. It's shielded. My father's scanners, they won't see us there. Lila remembered her grandfather's old stone building on the hill. Thick walls, metal roof. Buried deep in the trees. It was the perfect place. She helped Illyra up. Kalen rose too, though he moved stiffly. Together they slipped out the back door, staying low, moving fast through the rain. Rusty followed without a sound. The walk to the observatory felt like forever. Every rustle in the bushes made Lila jump. Every flash of red light in the sky made her heart stop. But they made it. Inside, the air was cool and dusty. Star charts covered the walls. A big telescope pointed at the ceiling. Lila locked the heavy door and pulled the shutters closed. Illyra sank to the floor, exhausted. Kalen curled around her like a living blanket. They won't leave, Illyra said softly. Not until they find me. Why are they after you? Lila asked. Illyra looked at her, eyes full of sorrow. Because I refuse to let them destroy your world. Lila sat down beside her. Your father, he's going to attack Earth? Illyra nodded. He sees humans as weak, unworthy. He wants to burn your cities, take your resources, erase your history. I stood against him. So he cast me out, sent me here to die. But you didn't die, Lila said. No, Illyra said, a small smile touching her lips. I found you. Outside, the red light circled lower. The hum of engines, silent but felt in the bones, grew stronger. Lila knew they didn't have much time. She looked at Illyra, then at Kalen, then at the old telescope her grandfather used to map the stars. An idea began to form. We're not hiding forever, Lila said. We're going to fight. Illyra stared at her. You're just a girl. So are you, Lila said. But you're also a princess. And I'm a teacher's granddaughter. Maybe that's enough. For the first time, Illyra laughed, a soft musical sound that filled the room like hope. The storm outside began to ease. The red lights moved on, searching the wrong places. For now, they were safe. But Lila knew this was only the beginning. The war hadn't started yet. But the first spark had been lit. In a rainy forest, in a broken house, in the heart of a lonely girl who chose to care. And somewhere in the dark, Kalen opened one golden eye, watching over them both. 3 years had passed since that stormy night in the Oregon woods. The little house at the edge of the forest was still there, but it was no longer quiet. Inside, the air buzzed with energy. Screens glowed on every wall. Maps of Earth and distant stars covered the tables. And the smell of coffee mixed with the sharp scent of ozone from charging tech. Lila Dawson was no longer the shy girl who hid in books. She was taller now, her brown hair tied back in a practical braid, her eyes sharp and steady. She moved with purpose, her hands quick and sure as she adjusted a holographic display showing troop movements across the Pacific Rim. Across the room, Illyra stood by the window. She had grown too, her silver hair now braided with thin threads of copper wire that pulsed faintly with energy. Her pointed ears twitched at every distant sound. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a dark sweater. But around her neck hung a small crystal that glowed when she used her mind. She was stronger now, calmer, but the weight of her past never left her eyes. Kalen lay coiled on the roof above them, his silver scales catching the morning sun. He was much larger now, nearly the size of a small car, with wings that could block out the sky. His golden eyes watched the horizon, always alert. He rarely came inside anymore. The house was too small for him. But he never strayed far. Their days followed a rhythm. Mornings were for learning. Lila taught Elira about human history, about revolutions, peace treaties, art, and music. She showed her videos of children laughing, of people helping strangers after disasters, of protests where no one carried weapons, but still changed the world. Elira listened, fascinated. She had been raised in a court of cold logic and rigid order. Earth's messy, loud, beautiful chaos amazed her. Afternoons were for training. In the clearing behind the house, Elira practiced her psionic abilities, lifting stones with her mind, bending light to hide herself, sending thoughts directly into Lila's head. At first, it had given Lila headaches. Now she could almost hear Elira's voice without sound. Kalen trained too. Lila had built him a flight course through the trees, using old drone parts and repurposed farm equipment. He learned to dodge, to strike fast, to carry small loads in his claws. He wasn't just a pet. He was a warrior, and he was loyal to only two beings, Elira and Lila. Evenings were for planning. They knew the Varelian Empire hadn't forgotten Elira. Scanners swept Earth's orbit every few months. Small scout ships disguised as satellites or meteors had been spotted near the moon. The hunters were patient, but they were coming. Lila had spent months studying alien tech, using fragments Elira had salvaged from her crashed escape pod. She learned how their comms worked, how their shields bent light, how their weapons drew power from quantum cores. She wasn't a scientist, but she was clever, and she had time. One afternoon, as rain tapped softly on the roof, Lila sat at the kitchen table with a steaming mug. Elira joined her holding a book of poetry, Emily Dickinson, her favorite. "They're getting bolder," Elira said quietly. 2 days ago, a Varelian ship entered Earth's atmosphere near Geneva. It landed in the Alps. No one saw it. But I felt it, Lila nodded. They're testing us, seeing how much we know. They think we're still hiding, Elira said. They don't know we've been watching them too, Lila smiled. Exactly. She stood and walked to the far wall, where a large screen showed a live feed from a hidden camera she'd placed near the United Nations building in New York. For weeks, strange diplomats had been arriving, tall, pale figures in sleek suits, speaking perfect English but never blinking, never sweating, never eating in public. They call themselves the Galactic Observers, Lila said, but their ship IDs match Varelian registry codes. They're scouts, and they're setting up something big. Elira frowned. A gala is happening next week at the UN. All world leaders will be there. If they strike, then they won't strike, Lila said. Not yet. They want to study us first. But that gala, it's our chance. Elira looked at her. What do you mean? Lila's eyes sparkled with a plan she'd been shaping for months. We show the world who they really are. The idea was risky. Insane, even. But Lila had learned one thing from teaching Elira. Humans believed what they saw, not what they were told. So they needed proof, real, undeniable proof that Earth was not alone, and that not all aliens were enemies. Their target was the Varelian Embassy, a sleek black tower in Manhattan that had appeared overnight 6 months ago. Officially, it was a cultural center. Unofficially, it was a fortress. Its walls were lined with cloaking tech that bent light and blocked scans. No cameras worked near it. No signals got in or out, but Lila had found a weakness. During a solar flare last winter, the embassy's shield had flickered for 3.7 seconds. In that moment, her homemade satellite had caught a glimpse inside. Figures with pointed ears, glowing consoles, weapons stacked like firewood. She knew the shield ran on a quantum loop tied to Earth's magnetic field. It reset every 12 hours at solar noon. For exactly 4.2 seconds, the system rebooted. That was their window. Now, with the UN Gala happening in 3 days, they had to act fast. They packed light. Lila wore dark clothes, boots with silent soles, and a belt full of tools. Elira carried only her crystal pendant and a small blade made of star metal. Kalen would stay hidden in the clouds above the city, ready to move if needed. They took a bus to Portland, then a train to New York. No flights, too traceable. They used fake IDs Lila had printed on her old inkjet. They spoke little. The city loomed ahead, tall and bright and unaware. The night of the gala, rain fell again, soft this time like a whisper. The streets were full of limousines and flashing cameras. World leaders in tuxedos and gowns walked up the red carpet, smiling for the world. Lila and Elira moved through the shadows behind the embassy. The building hummed with invisible energy. Lila checked her watch. 2 minutes to solar noon. She pulled a small device from her pocket, a jury-rigged pulse emitter made from a microwave transformer and a car battery. It wouldn't destroy the shield, but it would overload the reboot sequence. "Ready," she whispered. Elira nodded, her hand on Lila's arm. "Be careful." Lila pressed the button. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the air around the embassy shimmered, like heat rising from asphalt. The black walls flickered, and for 4.2 seconds the truth was visible. Inside, the elegant lobby vanished. In its place stood a cold metallic chamber. Tall figures with silver skin and glowing eyes moved between consoles. One turned, sensing the breach, and stared straight at Lila. But it was too late. Across the street, a news van's camera, left running by a tired intern, caught it all. The flicker, the aliens, the weapons, the footage spread before the Varelians could react. Within an hour, it was on every screen in the world. Phones buzzed. TVs blared. Social media exploded. People were scared, angry, confused. But something else happened too. In Tokyo, students held signs that read, "We are not alone." In Nairobi, a group of engineers began building signal boosters to talk to the stars. In Rio, musicians played songs about unity. And in small towns across America, people looked up at the night sky not with fear, but with wonder, because for the first time, they had seen an alien, and she had been fighting for them. Back in New York, Lila and Elira slipped away before the police arrived. They didn't go back to Oregon, not yet. They found a safe house Lila had prepared, a tiny apartment in Brooklyn filled with books, spare parts, and a view of the harbor. That night, as the city buzzed with panic and hope, Lila sat by the window. Elira joined her, holding 2 mugs of tea. "They know now," Elira said softly. Lila nodded, and now they have a choice, to hide or to stand. Elira looked at her, eyes full of something like pride. "You did this. You showed them." "No," Lila said. "We did. You gave me the courage. Kalen gave us strength and humanity. They just needed to see the truth." Outside, the rain stopped. The clouds parted. Stars appeared, bright and countless. High above, circling silently, Kalen let out a low rumble only they could feel. He was watching. Always watching. The war hadn't started yet. But the world was no longer asleep. And Lila Dawson, the girl who once hid in books, had just lit the first real flame of resistance. She didn't know what came next. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid, because now Earth had a teacher, a princess, and a dragon, and together they were ready. The world changed fast after the UN gala. What had been whispers became roars. Governments argued. Scientists demanded answers. Religious leaders spoke of signs and prophecies. But one thing was clear. Earth was no longer alone, and it was no longer safe. Lila and Elira stayed hidden in their Brooklyn apartment for weeks. They watched the news every hour. Some countries called for peace talks. Others began building weapons, scanning the skies for more ships. A few even claimed the footage was a hoax, but most people believed, and many believed in Lila. Her face had never been shown, but her voice, calm, clear, full of quiet strength, had been heard in a short message she'd slipped into the global broadcast right after the embassy reveal. "They think we are weak because we cry, because we love, because we protect the helpless. But that is our power, not theirs." That message spread like wildfire. Graffiti appeared on walls in Paris, Cairo, and Jakarta. "We feel, therefore we fight." Schools held debates about alien rights. Teenagers built signal towers in their backyards, hoping to send messages to the stars. But not everyone was inspired. In a secure bunker beneath Colorado, a man named Vance Cole watched the same footage with cold eyes. He was head of Global Security Integration, a shadow agency with more power than most presidents. He had always believed humanity's survival depended on control, not compassion. And now he saw his chance. He made a deal. No one knew the details. But within days, Varelian tech began appearing in secret military bases, energy cores, shield generators, even neural scanners. In exchange, Cole promised the Varelians access to Earth's data networks, population centers, and, most importantly, Lila Dawson. He knew she was the key. Not because she was strong, but because she was trusted. If he could turn her or silence her, the resistance would crumble. Lila didn't know about Cole yet, but she felt the shift. The air grew heavier, safe houses went dark. A friend in Toronto stopped answering calls. Then, one morning, their Brooklyn apartment's power cut out, not from a storm, but from a targeted pulse. "They found us," Alira said, already packing. Lila nodded. She had expected this. She pulled a small drive from under the floorboard, filled with everything she'd learned about Varelian tech, human defense grids, and a plan she'd been writing for months. They left through the fire escape, Kalen meeting them on the roof as planned. He landed silently, wings folding like shadows. Lila climbed onto his back, Alira behind her. With a powerful leap, they rose into the gray sky, vanishing before the first black vans arrived. Their next stop was Geneva. Not for safety, but for strategy. Lila had spent nights studying old Cold War bunkers, abandoned research labs, and forgotten communication hubs. One place stood out, the old CERN facility, deep beneath the Swiss Alps. Its particle accelerator was offline, but its data core was still active and shielded from orbital scans by kilometers of rock. More importantly, it was neutral ground. No single nation owned it, and that meant Cole couldn't control it. They arrived at dawn. Snow covered the mountains like a blanket. Kalen landed in a hidden valley, his scales blending with the ice. Lila and Alira hiked the last mile on foot, breath fogging in the cold air. Inside the facility, it was quiet. Dust floated in the beams of their flashlights. But the system still worked. Lila jacked into the mainframe using a modified neural link Alira had built from salvaged Varelian parts. Within hours, she had full control. This was where the real plan began. Lila wasn't just fighting to save Earth. She was fighting to break the Varelian Empire itself. She knew the Empire ruled through fear. It crushed rebellions before they started. It erased cultures, rewrote histories, turned entire species into slaves. But it had one weakness: it relied on unity. If that unity cracked, the whole system would fall. So she wrote a message. Not for Earth, for the galaxy. Using the CERN array, she boosted a signal far beyond normal range. She encoded it in 1,000 languages, human and alien, using patterns Alira taught her. The message showed footage of Earth, children playing, doctors healing, farmers sharing food, artists painting, people helping strangers after earthquakes and floods. Then it showed the Varelian embassy footage. The weapons, the lies. And finally, Lila's voice again, simple and true. "They say we are weak because we feel. But feeling is how we know what is worth protecting. If you are tired of fear, if you dream of peace, rise with us. You are not alone." She sent it. Not just once, over and over. Bouncing off satellites, pulsars, even the edge of black holes. It would take weeks to reach the outer systems. But it would reach them. While she worked, Alira stood guard at the entrance, her mind scanning for threats. Kalen circled high above, his golden eyes missing nothing. But Cole was faster than they thought. He had tracked the energy spike from CERN. Within hours, Varelian scouts were inbound. And this time they weren't alone. Human jets, painted in UN colors but flying Cole's orders, escorted them. Lila saw them on the radar. "We have to go now," but Alira shook her head. "The signal needs 10 more minutes to lock. If we leave now, it fails." Lila cursed under her breath. Then she smiled. "Then we buy 10 minutes. She ran to a side room filled with old robotics parts. While Alira focused on shielding their location with a psionic dampener, Lila wired together drones. Small, fast, armed with nothing but noise and light. She programmed them to mimic Varelian scout signatures and sent them flying toward the Italian border. The ruse worked. The enemy split their forces chasing ghosts, but one ship stayed. A heavy cruiser, black as night, hovered over the valley. It opened its bay. Drop pods fell like rain. Lila grabbed a plasma cutter from her pack, salvaged from Alira's escape pod years ago. Alira drew her star metal blade. Kalen landed on the ridge above, wings spread wide, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The first soldiers emerged, tall, armored, faces hidden behind smooth masks. They moved in perfect sync, weapons humming with blue energy. Lila didn't wait. She fired the plasma cutter. The beam sliced through the lead soldier's armor like paper. He fell without a sound. Illyra raised her hands. The ground trembled. Rocks lifted, then shot forward like bullets. 2 more soldiers dropped. Kalen leapt from the ridge, a silver streak of fury. His claws tore through armor. His tail smashed consoles. His roar shook the snow from the trees, but there were too many. Lila knew they couldn't win a fight. So she changed the plan. She triggered the facility's old coolant system. Pipes burst. Supercooled gas flooded the valley. The Varelian weapons sputtered and died in the extreme cold. Their armor cracked. In the chaos, Lila grabbed Illyra's hand. Now they ran back inside. The signal was locked. Sent. Kalen followed, bleeding from a gash on his shoulder but still strong. They escaped through an old maintenance tunnel, emerging miles away in a forest of pine and ice. Behind them, the cruiser fired on the facility, reducing it to rubble. But the message was already gone, riding the stars. Days later, hiding in a cabin near the Norwegian coast, Lila checked a small receiver she'd built. Faint signals were coming back, not from Earth, from elsewhere. A coded ping from the Zinthari system, once a proud warrior race, now enslaved miners. A burst of music from the floating cities of Luma 9, where poets had been silenced for generations. A single word repeated in 100 dialects, hope. Tears filled Lila's eyes. It was working, but their victory was short-lived. That night, as the aurora danced overhead, Kalen stiffened. His head snapped toward the sky. Lila felt it too, a pressure in the air, deep and cold. Not scouts, not cruisers, something worse. She turned on her long-range scanner. The screen filled with red. A massive ship hung in high orbit, larger than any city. Dark, jagged, shaped like a crown of thorns, Illyra went pale. The Sovereign's Wrath, she whispered. My father's flagship. He had come himself, and with him a new message reached Earth, not through signals, but through fear. Every screen on the planet flickered at once. Every phone, every TV, every billboard. And on them appeared the face of the Varelian king. He was tall, regal, with eyes like frozen stars and a voice that dripped with contempt. Daughter, he said, though the words sounded like a curse, you have played with fire long enough. Return to me now. Surrender the human, and this foolish rebellion, or I will burn your adopted world to ash. You have until dawn. The screen went dark. Silence fell over the cabin. Lila looked at Illyra. Illyra looked at Kalen, and Kalen looked at the stars as if already saying goodbye. Lila stood up. Her hands shook, but her voice did not. He thinks we'll run, she said. He thinks we'll beg. She walked to the window, watching the northern lights swirl like living paint. But we're not going to do either. She turned, eyes blazing with quiet fire. We're going to meet him. Dawn came too soon. The sky over Norway turned pale pink, but no birds sang. The world held its breath. Lila stood on the frozen shore, wrapped in a thick coat, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. Behind her, the cabin was empty. All their gear was gone, packed into a single satchel slung over her shoulder. Illyra stood beside her, silent, her silver hair loose in the wind. Kalen waited a few yards away, wings folded tight, his golden eyes fixed on the sky. The king's ship still hung there, massive, dark, unmoving. Like a god waiting for worship. Lila had spent the night planning. Not running, not hiding, attacking, but not with bombs or guns. With truth, she knew they couldn't win a battle. The Sovereign's Wrath carried enough firepower to shatter continents. But the king had made one mistake. He had come himself. And where there was a face, there was a chance. We go up alone, Lila said. Just us, no armies. No tricks, Illyra nodded. He will not expect mercy. He won't expect truth either, Lila replied. Kalen stepped forward, lowing softly. He wanted to come, but Lila shook her head. You have another job, she said, kneeling to touch his snout. If this fails, you go to Mars, you finish what we started. Kalen's eyes dimmed, but he bowed his head. He understood. Using a stolen Varelian beacon from their supplies, Lila sent a single signal. We surrender. Send a shuttle. Minutes later, a sleek craft descended, silent and smooth. It landed on the ice without a sound. The ramp lowered. Two armored guards stepped out, weapons ready. Lila and Elira walked forward, hands empty. The guard scanned them, then nodded. They were allowed aboard. Inside, the shuttle was cold and bright. No seats, no windows, just smooth white walls that hummed with energy. The trip to the flagship felt like seconds and hours at once. When the doors opened, they stood in a vast chamber, taller than a cathedral, lit by floating orbs of blue light. The floor was black glass, reflecting the stars above as if they walked on the void itself. At the far end, on a throne of twisted metal and crystal, sat the Varelian king. He rose as they approached. He was taller than Elira, his face sharp and ageless, his eyes like chips of ice. He wore no crown, but power radiated from him like heat. "Daughter," he said, voice echoing through the hall. "You return with your pet human. How quaint." Elira stopped 10 paces away. "I am not your weapon anymore, father." "You are my blood," he snapped. "And blood obeys." Lila stepped forward. "She obeys her conscience. Something you forgot long ago." The king's eyes narrowed. "You dare speak to me, insect?" "I'm not an insect," Lila said calmly. "I'm a teacher, and I'm here to show you what you've lost." Before he could react, she pulled a small device from her coat, a data core wrapped in copper wire. She pressed a button. Suddenly, the chamber filled with light. Holograms bloomed in the air. Hundreds of them. Images from Earth, a child sharing bread with a stranger, doctors working through the night, musicians playing in bombed-out streets, farmers planting seeds after a flood, Lila's own grandfather showing her the stars through his telescope. Then came the voices. Not threats. Not war cries. Just people, laughing, crying, singing, comforting each other. The king stared, unmoving, but his guard shifted uneasily. "This is weakness," he said, though his voice wavered slightly. "No," Lila said. "This is strength. You think power is control, but real power is choice. These people choose to care even when it hurts, even when it costs them." Elira stepped beside her. "I saw it, father. I lived it. Humans are not perfect, but they protect what they love. They build even when everything falls. That is not weakness. That is courage." The king's face darkened. "Sentiment. Lies wrapped in pretty pictures." Then Lila played her final card. She activated the second part of the broadcast, the one she'd prepared in secret. Footage from across the galaxy began to appear. The Zenthari miners tearing down their overseer's towers, the poets of Luma 9 broadcasting songs of freedom, a dozen worlds rising not with weapons but with voices, and over it all a single message repeated in every language. "We stand with Earth." The king's eyes widened. For the first time, fear flickered in them. "You did this," he whispered, looking at Elira. "No," Elira said. "They did. You taught them to obey, but they remembered how to hope." At that moment, alarms blared through the ship. Red lights flashed, a voice crackled over the comms. "My lord, the fleet. The outer squadrons are turning. They're locking weapons on us." The king spun toward the main view screen. There, in the blackness of space, dozens of Varelian ships, once loyal, now aimed their cannons at the sovereign's wrath. His own people had turned. "You cannot win," Lila said softly. "Not when your own empire rejects you," the king roared in fury. He drew a blade of pure energy from his belt. "Then I will burn Earth myself before I let you win." He raised his weapon, not at Lila, but at a control panel that would trigger orbital fire on every major city. But Elira moved faster. She closed her eyes and reached deep, not with anger but with memory. She sent a wave of thought into her father's mind, not pain but truth. She showed him everything she had seen on Earth, the kindness, the songs, the quiet moments of love that no empire could crush. And she showed him one more thing, herself as a child, asking why they couldn't just talk to other worlds instead of conquering them. And his answer, because the weak do not deserve to speak. The king froze. The blade in his hand flickered. For a heartbeat, the cold mask cracked. Grief, regret, shame, human emotions he had long buried rose to the surface. Then the ship shook violently. Explosions rocked the hull. Not from outside, from within, Kalen. He had followed them after all. While Lila and Elira faced the king, Kalen had breached the lower decks. Using his bond with Elira, he found the ship's core. Now with his last strength, he planted the quantum destabilizers they had built months ago. The ship groaned. Lights died. Gravity flickered. Kalen, Elira cried, feeling his pain through their bond. Lila grabbed her arm. "We have to go now," but Elira pulled free. "No, this ends here." She ran toward her father, not to fight, but to stand between him and the controls. The king looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, saw not a traitor but his daughter. The blade fell from his hand. Outside, the rebel ships opened fire, not on Earth, but on the Sovereign's wrath. The flagship began to break apart. Lila dragged Elira toward an escape pod bay. Behind them, the king did not follow. He stood on his crumbling throne, watching the stars one last time. The pod launched just as the core exploded. They watched from orbit as the great ship shattered into fire and silence. Earth was safe, but Kalen was gone. Back on the surface, cities that had braced for annihilation now stood untouched. People poured into the streets, crying, hugging, looking up in wonder. In the escape pod, Elira wept silently. Lila held her hand. They landed in the same forest in Oregon where it all began. Rain fell gently as if the sky was mourning too. Days passed. The world celebrated. The Varelian Empire collapsed into civil war, then peace talks. New alliances formed. Earth was no longer a target, it was a symbol. But Lila and Elira stayed quiet. They returned to the old house, now half ruined by time and weather. They rebuilt it together, board by board. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lila spoke. "He didn't have to die," she said. "No," Elira replied, "but he chose to see. That was his last act of freedom." They didn't speak of Kalen much, but every night they left a small light burning on the roof just in case. And sometimes on very still nights they thought they heard a distant roar, faint, golden, and full of promise. 5 years after the fall of the Sovereign's wrath, Earth was not the same world. Cities still stood, but they were greener, quieter, kinder. Roads once filled with cars now had gardens growing in the cracks. Schools taught not just math and science, but empathy, history of other worlds, and how to listen to the stars. Lila Dawson lived in the same house in Oregon, though it had been rebuilt with stronger walls and a new observatory on the hill. This one open to anyone who wanted to look up. She was 26 now, her hair longer, her hands calloused from work, but her eyes still held that quiet fire. Elira stayed with her. She had been offered the Varelian throne after the Civil War ended, but she refused. Instead, she helped form the Conquered, a council of free worlds, each with one voice, no matter how small. She wore no crown, only a simple silver band on her wrist that pulsed softly when ships from distant stars sent greetings. They were not rulers, they were guides. And Earth had become something new. Not a planet of soldiers, but a planet of teachers. Every week, Lila stood before a global classroom, not in a building, but through a network of open channels that reached every continent and beyond. She taught children how to ask questions, how to solve problems without violence, how to care for those who are different. Her lessons were translated into hundreds of languages, human and alien alike. Her most famous lesson was simple: strength is not in how hard you can hit. It is in how gently you can hold someone who is broken. Meanwhile, Elira worked with engineers from a dozen worlds to build the seed ships. They were not warships. They carried no weapons. Instead, their holds were filled with libraries, seeds from Earth's forests and farms, recordings of music and laughter, children's drawings taped to the walls, and soil from every nation. Each ship was named after a human value: hope, kindness, curiosity, peace. The first launch was set for spring. On the morning of the launch, Lila and Elira stood on the hill behind the house, watching the sky. The sun was just rising, painting the clouds in gold and pink. Below them, people gathered: farmers, scientists, artists, former soldiers, children holding hands with elders. No flags, no uniforms, just people. The first seed ship, named Tomorrow, lifted from the launch pad in Nevada. It rose slowly, at first then faster, until it was a bright star against the blue. Lila felt a tear roll down her cheek. Not from sadness, but from fullness. "They're carrying more than supplies," she said softly. "They're carrying a promise." Elira nodded. "That we choose to build, not destroy." Later that day, they walked to the edge of the woods, the same spot where Lila had found Elira all those years ago. The ground was soft with new grass. In the center, under the old lightning-scarred oak, sat a small stone cairn. On top rested a single silver scale, Kalen's scale. They had never found his body, but they knew he was part of the stars now. Lila knelt and placed a small pouch beside the cairn. Inside was Kalen's ashes, mixed with stardust collected from the wreckage of the Sovereign's wrath and soil from every continent on Earth. "We scatter them today," she said. Elira closed, her eyes and whispered words in the old Varelian tongue, a blessing for warriors who die protecting others. Then together they opened the pouch and let the wind take it. The ashes rose like fireflies catching the sunlight, then vanished into the sky. For a long time, they stood in silence. That night, as they sat on the porch with mugs of tea, a soft chime came from the observatory. Lila went to check. On the main screen, a signal blinked, weak but clear. It came from the outer rim of the galaxy, near the ruins of a dead star. It was not a message, not a warning. It was a heartbeat. Slow, steady, growing. Lila called Elira. They watched together as the signal resolved into a shape, a small, warm signature, pulsing with life. A dragon egg. Not Kalen reborn, but something new. Waiting. Elira placed a hand on Lila's shoulder. "He is not gone," she said. "He is becoming." Lila smiled. "Then we have work to do." In the weeks that followed, they prepared, not for war, but for welcome. They sent a small ship, not armed, not fast, but gentle, to the coordinates. Inside, they placed a cradle lined with earth, moss, a recording of rain on leaves, and a single note written in Lila's hand: "You are loved." The ship launched under a full moon. Back on Earth, life went on. Children played in the streets. Gardens bloomed on rooftops. At night, people gathered to watch the stars, not with fear, but with wonder. Lila still taught. Elira still advised. But they no longer carried the weight of war. They carried the light of what came after. One evening, as autumn painted the trees in red and gold, a young girl came to the house. She was shy, with wide eyes and a notebook full of questions. "Are you the teacher?" she asked Lila. Lila knelt to meet her gaze. "I try to be." The girl looked at Elira, then at the sky. "Will the dragon come back?" Lila glanced at Elira, then at the stars. "Not the same dragon," she said, "but something just as brave, just as kind." The girl smiled. "Can I help?" Lila took her hand. "Everyone can help. All you need is a heart that cares." And so the story did not end. It grew, like a seed in the dark, like a song in the silence, like a single act of kindness in a broken world. It grew. Lila and Elira knew they would not see all the fruits of their work, but that was okay. They had planted the seeds, and somewhere, far beyond the edge of known space, a new light pulsed in the dark, golden, warm, and full of promise.